The rain fell in sheets, a cold, indifferent curtain against the glass walls of the skyscraper. Inside, the silence was colder still. Naima stood with her arms crossed, her posture a fortress of tailored silk and rigid disappointment. The man before her, Kieran, held a simple cardboard box. It contained a fern, a well-worn book on logistics, and a framed photograph that was turned away from her, a secret he was taking with him. He hadn't said much. He had simply listened as she delivered the verdict, her voice as crisp and sterile as the marble floor beneath their feet. The project was terminated. His contract, nullified. It was a matter of efficiency, she had explained, a strategic pivot. There was no room for the kind of small human error he had made, a miscalculation in a shipping schedule that had cost a client a single day. In her world, a single day was an eternity of lost capital. He looked at her now, his eyes not angry, but weary. They were kind eyes, she noted with a flicker of detached observation, the kind that had seen too little sleep. He wore a pressed but faded blue shirt, the collar slightly frayed. He was tall, a black man with broad shoulders that seemed to stoop slightly, not in deference, but under a weight she couldn't see. "I understand," he said, his voice quiet but clear. It held no argument, no plea. It was the sound of acceptance. That was what bothered her most, his stillness, his dignity. It felt like an accusation her power could not answer. She wanted him to be angry, to fight back, to prove her decision was a necessary cruelty. Instead, he just nodded. "Security will escort you," she said, the words feeling hollow and unnecessarily sharp. He shifted the box in his arms. "That won't be necessary. I know the way out." He turned, his work boots making no sound on the plush runner that led to the elevators. He didn't look back. The doors slid shut, and his reflection vanished. Naima was left alone in the cavernous office, surrounded by glass and steel and the relentless drumming of the rain. She felt a pang of something unfamiliar, a disquiet that lingered long after he was gone. It was the feeling of having dismissed something, or someone, that mattered more than she knew. And in that moment, as the city lights blurred into watercolor streaks on her window, his life was about to be turned upside down. And so, in a way she could never have predicted, was hers. Days passed, then weeks. The memory of the quiet man with the cardboard box faded from Naima's mind, buried under a mountain of quarterly reports, board meetings, and investment proposals. Her life was a meticulously curated series of victories. She was Naima Sinclair, senior partner at Apex Ventures, a woman who could make or break fortunes with a single signature. Her world was one of glass towers that pierced the clouds and boardrooms where the air was thick with the scent of money and ambition. She wore her success like armor, her natural hair pulled back into an elegant, severe bun that tolerated no stray strands. Her deep brown skin was luminous under the recessed lighting of her office, a testament to a wellness routine as punishing as her work schedule. But her penthouse apartment, with its panoramic views of the city, was silent. It was a museum of a life, not a home. The designer furniture was untouched, the kitchen pristine from disuse. Loneliness was a ghost that sat with her at the long, empty dining table. She had achieved everything her parents, both driven doctors, had demanded of her. Excellence, power, uncompromising success. But they had never taught her how to be soft, how to connect, how to receive a kindness without seeing it as a transaction. A failed engagement years ago had reinforced the lesson. Vulnerability was a liability. So she worked. Work was clean. Work was controllable. Love was not. She was reviewing the final round of pitches for the Apex Innovation Grant, a 7-figure investment in a promising new tech startup. Her team had narrowed it down to 3 finalists. The first 2 were predictable. Slick presentations from Ivy League graduates with disruptive apps for the gig economy. She was unimpressed. The third was a wild card, a logistics optimization software called Synchrony. The file was lean, the pitch deck simple, almost humble. But the technology was brilliant. It used a predictive algorithm to streamline supply chains with an efficiency she had never seen. It was elegant, intuitive, and had the potential to revolutionize the entire industry. The founder is a bit of an unknown, her analyst, a young man named David, had warned her. No track record in tech. He's been working in warehouse management for the last decade. Naima had waved him off. I don't care where he comes from. I care if his idea works. The day of the final presentation arrived. Naima sat at the head of the long, polished table, flanked by her partners. The founders of the first two companies came and went, leaving a wake of jargon and overconfidence. Then, the door opened for the final pitch. A man walked in. He was tall, with broad shoulders and kind, tired eyes. He wore a simple dark gray suit that was clean and well-pressed, but clearly not designer. His short, natural hair was neatly trimmed. It was him, the man from her office, the man with the cardboard box, Kieran. He stopped short when he saw her, his composure faltering for a single, breathtaking second. A flicker of recognition, and something else, something she couldn't name, passed through his eyes. But he recovered instantly, his expression smoothing into a mask of quiet professionalism. He walked to the front of the room, set his laptop on the podium, and took a deep breath. Naima's heart was hammering against her ribs. The room felt suddenly airless. She could feel the eyes of her partners on her, waiting for a reaction, but she kept her face a placid mask of indifference. He had worked for her. She had fired him. And now he was standing here, pitching an idea that her entire team agreed was revolutionary. "Good morning," Kieran began, his voice the same one she remembered, calm, steady, resonant. "My name is Kieran Maxwell, and I'm the founder of Synchrony." He didn't acknowledge their past. He launched directly into his presentation, and he was extraordinary. He spoke not in the abstract language of venture capital, but in the grounded, practical terms of a man who had spent his life on the warehouse floor. He talked about lost time, about frustrated workers, about the human cost of inefficiency. He explained his algorithm with a clarity that was both simple and profound. He wasn't selling an app. He was selling a solution born from a decade of first-hand experience. He was selling his life's work. When he finished, the room was silent. One of her partners, a notoriously cynical man named Arthur, leaned forward. "Mr. Maxwell, this is impressive. Where did you develop this?" Kieran's gaze drifted for a moment, a subtle softening around his eyes. "In my spare time, after I put my daughter to bed." The mention of a child hung in the air, a small, warm detail in the sterile environment of the boardroom. Naima felt that unfamiliar pang again, stronger this time. She had dismissed this man, this brilliant, determined father, over a clerical error. She had thrown away the key without ever bothering to see what door it unlocked. "Thank you, Mr. Maxwell," Naima said, her voice betraying none of the turmoil inside her. "We'll be in touch." He nodded, packed his laptop, and left the room without a backward glance. The moment the door closed, all eyes turned to her. "Well," Arthur asked, "what do you think?" Naima looked at the empty space where Kieran had stood. The man she had deemed inefficient had just designed the future of efficiency. The man she had kicked out was the one she now had to let in. "I think," she said slowly, the words tasting like irony, "we've found our winner." Kieran's apartment was on the third floor of a walk-up in a quiet, historically black neighborhood on the other side of the city. It was small, but it was filled with a light that had nothing to do with the single large window in the living room. It was the light of a life lived with intention and love. The walls were covered in a gallery of children's drawings, vibrant splashes of color depicting smiling suns, lopsided houses, and stick figures with wide grins. The air smelled of cinnamon and old books. This was his sanctuary, the world he had built for his daughter, Amara. She was 6 years old, a tiny girl with bright, perceptive eyes and natural hair always styled in beautiful twists or puffs, often decorated with the colorful beads he'd learned to weave in himself. She was the center of his universe, the reason he breathed. His wife, Lena, had passed away 3 years ago, a sudden illness that had stolen the breath from their lives. The grief was a quiet roommate, always present but no longer overwhelming. He channeled it into being the best father he could be. He packed her lunch every morning, braiding her hair while she chattered about her dreams, which were always epic adventures involving talking squirrels and flying carpets. He worked his job at the logistics firm, the same one Naima had contracted him from, and then came home to make dinner, read bedtime stories, and, after Amara was asleep, he would open his laptop. Synchrony was born in those quiet hours between midnight and 3 a.m., fueled by lukewarm coffee and a fierce determination to build something more for his daughter. It was his answer to a broken system he knew from the inside out. He never dreamed it would lead him back to the woman who had fired him. When the call came from Apex Ventures, his heart seized. He expected a polite rejection. Instead, it was Naima Sinclair herself on the line. Her voice was as controlled as ever, but there was a new, unreadable note in it. "Mr. Maxwell," she said, "the board was unanimous. We'd like to move forward with the investment. My team will send over the term sheet." Kieran sank onto his worn sofa, the phone pressed to his ear. He looked at a drawing taped to the wall, a portrait of him and Amara holding hands under a rainbow. "Thank you, Ms. Sinclair." "There is the matter of the due diligence process," she continued, all business. "I'll need to conduct a series of on-site visits to understand your operational framework." He knew what that meant. She wanted to see his world. The thought of this powerful, impeccably dressed woman stepping into his small, crayon-filled apartment was both terrifying and strangely amusing. "Of course," he said. "When would be a good time?" "Tomorrow, 5 p.m. The line went dead. Kieran stared at the phone for a long moment. He had won. He had secured his daughter's future. But to do it, he had to let the woman who represented a world of cold calculation into the one place that was defined by warmth. The next day, at 5 o'clock on the dot, the buzzer rang. Kieran took a deep breath and pressed the button. He heard the click of expensive heels on the linoleum of the building's hallway, a sound as out of place as a symphony in a library. He opened the door. Naima stood there, a vision in a cream-colored pantsuit. She held a leather portfolio, her knuckles white. Her eyes did a quick, sweeping survey of his living room, taking in the worn furniture, the overflowing bookshelf, the riot of childish art on the walls. He saw a flicker of surprise in her expression, quickly masked. "Miss Sinclair," he said, stepping back to let her in. "Mr. Maxwell," she replied, her tone formal. And then, a small whirlwind of energy shot out from the kitchen. "Daddy, is that the fancy lady from your computer meeting?" Amara skidded to a halt in front of Naima, her beaded braids clicking softly. She tilted her head, her big brown eyes wide with curiosity. "Your hair is in a donut," she observed with the unfiltered honesty of a child. "Mommy used to wear her hair in a donut sometimes." The air thickened with an emotion Kieran couldn't name. Naima froze, her professional composure completely shattered. She looked down at the small girl, her mouth slightly open. For the first time, she looked lost. Kieran quickly stepped in. "Amara, this is Miss Sinclair. She's here to talk to Daddy about his work." "Hello," Naima managed, her voice a little strained. Amara beamed. "Hello, my name is Amara. I'm 6. Do you like butterflies? I love butterflies. I have a drawing of a butterfly with rainbow wings. Do you want to see it?" Before Naima could answer, Amara had grabbed her hand, her small fingers warm and trusting, and was pulling her toward the kitchen table, which was covered in art supplies. Naima stumbled after her, looking at Kieran with an expression of sheer panic. He offered her a small, apologetic smile. The on-site visit quickly devolved. Naima sat stiffly at the small wooden table, while Amara gave her a detailed tour of her latest masterpieces. Kieran made tea, the fragrant steam of ginger and lemon filling the small apartment. He set a mug in front of Naima. It was a simple, chipped ceramic mug with a cartoon cat on it. She stared at it as if it were a foreign artifact. "I don't have an office," Kieran said quietly, leaning against the counter. "It's just this. The company is me, this laptop, and the server space I rent." Naima finally tore her gaze away from Amara, who was now explaining the complex social hierarchy of her stuffed animals. She looked at Kieran, really looked at him. She saw the dark circles under his eyes, the strength in his calloused hands wrapped around his own mug. He wasn't a line on a resume or a face in a pitch deck. He was a father. A man building a dream for his daughter on a rickety kitchen table. "This is not what I expected," she admitted, her voice softer than he'd ever heard it. "Most people in your world don't expect this," he replied without bitterness. Amara looked up from her drawing. "Are you staying for dinner? Daddy is making spaghetti. He always burns the garlic bread, but it's still good." The bluntness of the invitation hung in the air. Naima's perfectly scheduled, hermetically sealed life did not include impromptu spaghetti dinners and third-floor walk-ups. Her protocol, her training, every instinct screamed for her to make a polite excuse and leave. But she looked at the hopeful face of the little girl and at the quiet, steady gaze of the man who was watching her, and she heard herself say a word that felt alien on her tongue. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that." The garlic bread was, as promised, slightly burnt. The spaghetti was perfect. They ate at the small kitchen table, Naima perched awkwardly on a wooden chair. Amara kept up a steady stream of chatter, asking Naima about her job. "Do you get to press a lot of buttons?" Her home? "Is it bigger than a castle?" And her favorite color. "It's not beige, is it? Beige is a sad color." For the first time in years, Naima laughed. A real, uncalculated laugh that surprised even herself. She saw Kieran watch her, a small, gentle smile on his face. In the warm, cramped kitchen, surrounded by the smell of garlic and the sound of a child's laughter, the armor around her heart began to crack. She felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with the tea or the food. It was the warmth of a home. As she was leaving, her portfolio forgotten on the sofa, Amara ran up to her and pressed a folded piece of paper into her hand. "This is for you," she said solemnly, "so you don't get lonely in your castle." Naima didn't open it until she was back in the sterile silence of her luxury car. She unfolded the paper under the soft glow of the dashboard light. It was a crayon drawing. 3 stick figures stood under a smiling sun. A tall man with brown skin, a little girl with beaded braids in a bright yellow dress, and a woman, also with brown skin, her hair in a neat circle on her head, wearing a cream-colored suit. They were all holding hands. Naima stared at the drawing, her vision blurring. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. It wasn't a tear of sadness or of pity. It was a tear of overwhelming, painful, beautiful recognition. A 6-year-old girl had seen her more clearly than anyone had in her entire adult life. She hadn't been seen as a partner at Apex Ventures or as a powerhouse CEO. She had simply been seen as a person who belonged. And for the first time in a very, very long time, she felt what it meant to be truly seen. The weeks that followed were a quiet revolution in Naima's life. The due diligence process became a convenient excuse for more visits to the small apartment. She told herself it was business. She was assessing the founder's character, his stability, his work ethic. But she knew it was a lie. She was drawn to the warmth, the chaotic, loving reality of Kieran and Amara's world. It was an antidote to the sterile perfection of her own. She found herself sitting on the floor, helping Amara build a lopsided tower of blocks. She learned that Kieran had a dry, understated sense of humor that only appeared when he felt comfortable. She discovered he read poetry and could fix anything with his hands, from a leaky faucet to the broken wing of a toy bird. He showed love through action. He'd notice she was cold and drape a blanket over her shoulders without a word. He'd remember she liked ginger in her tea and have a mug ready for her when she arrived. These small, unconditional acts of kindness undid her. She had spent her life proving her worth, earning her place at the table. Kieran never asked her for anything. He simply made space for her. One evening, while Amara was asleep, they sat in the quiet living room, the only light coming from a small lamp. The city hummed outside the window. "Why did you never tell me?" Naima asked, her voice barely a whisper. "At the presentation. Why didn't you say that we had met before?" Kieran looked at his hands, then at her. His gaze was direct and unflinching. "Because I wanted synchrony to be judged on its own merit, not on our history. I didn't want your pity, Naima. I wanted your respect." The way he said her name, without a title, sent a shiver through her. "You have it," she said, the words feeling inadequate. "You have more than that." He told her about Lena then. He spoke of her laughter, her fierce intelligence, her love for gardening. He didn't perform his grief. He simply shared its shape, the space it occupied in his life. "She was the one who believed in this idea first," he said, his voice thick with memory. "She said I saw the world differently. I just see the patterns, how things connect." Naima felt a profound sense of connection in that moment. She found herself telling him about her own wound, the crushing weight of her parents' expectations, the engagement that had ended when her fiancé told her she was more of a competitor than a partner. "I learned early that love was conditional," she confessed, the words tasting like rust. "It was something you earned by being the best." "No one should have to earn love," Kieran said softly. He didn't try to fix her or offer platitudes. He just sat with her in the shared silence, a quiet witness to her vulnerability. His presence was an anchor in the storm she had carried inside her for years. The bond between them deepened, moving from professional respect to a fragile, unspoken intimacy. But their two worlds were destined to collide. At Apex Ventures, Naima's frequent on-site visits and personal involvement with the Synchrony project had not gone unnoticed, particularly by Marcus Thorne. Marcus was another partner at the firm, a man whose ambition was matched only by his insecurity. He saw Naima's success as a personal affront and had been looking for a way to undermine her for years. He saw Kieran, this unknown from a working-class neighborhood, as Naima's weakness. He started subtly, raising concerns in meetings about the unusual nature of the investment. "Are we sure about this, Naima? A founder with no business background? It's a significant risk. Your personal oversight seems excessive." Naima deflected his barbs with cool professionalism, but she knew he was digging. He was looking for a crack, and one day, he found it. Marcus's team unearthed the details of Kieran's previous contract work, including the project for Naima's own consulting client and the abrupt termination of his contract. The reason cited in the file was gross incompetence leading to significant logistical failure. It was a brutal, corporate exaggeration of the single-day delay. Marcus had his weapon. He called an emergency board meeting, framing it as a matter of fiduciary duty in protecting the firm from a compromised partner. Naima received the summons, her stomach turning to ice. The email subject line was a declaration of war. "Urgent review, the Synchrony investment." She knew what was coming. Marcus would paint her as either a fool who had been duped or, worse, a compromised executive making a reckless investment to atone for a past mistake. He would use the termination file to destroy Kieran's credibility and, with it, her own. That evening, she went to Kieran's apartment. The dread was a physical weight on her shoulders. She didn't know how to tell him. When he opened the door, he must have seen the fear in her eyes. "What is it?" he asked, his voice low with concern. She explained the situation, her words clipped and precise, the language of the boardroom invading the warmth of his home. "He's going to use your termination to kill the deal. He'll frame you as incompetent and me as compromised for not disclosing our prior history." Kieran listened, his expression unreadable. He walked over to the window and looked out at the quiet street below. "So this is it," he said, not to her, but to the night. "I get this close, and the world I came from is used as a weapon to keep me out." "I won't let that happen," Naima said, her voice fierce. "I will fight him." He turned to face her, and for the first time she saw the deep well of exhaustion in his soul. "How, Naima? By playing his game? It's a world of sharks. You know that better than anyone. They will tear you apart to get to me." He was right. A part of her, the old Naima, was already calculating the angles, planning the corporate counterattack. But another part of her, the part that had learned to laugh at burnt garlic bread and treasure crayon drawings, knew that fighting fire with fire would only burn down everything they had started to build. "What if I don't play his game?" she whispered. Before he could answer, a small voice came from the hallway. "Daddy, why is the fancy lady sad?" Amara stood there, rubbing her eyes, her favorite stuffed bear clutched in her hand. She padded over to Naima and looked up at her, her small face etched with concern. She reached out and patted Naima's hand. "It's okay," she said softly. "Daddy says that after the sad part, the happy part comes. You just have to be brave." Naima looked down at the little girl, this innocent oracle who always spoke the simplest, most profound truths. Be brave. It wasn't about being ruthless or cunning. It was about being honest. It was about choosing truth over strategy. In that moment, looking at Amara's trusting face and Kieran's worried one, Naima knew what she had to do. She wasn't just fighting for an investment anymore. She was fighting for a home. She was fighting for the man who had taught her what it felt like to be seen, and for the little girl who had shown her what it meant to belong. The boardroom was a coliseum, and Naima was being fed to the lions. She sat at the head of the table, a picture of calm composure in a charcoal gray suit. Across from her, Marcus Thorne was circling, his voice dripping with feigned concern as he laid out his case. He projected the termination file onto the large screen at the front of the room. The words, "gross incompetence," glowed behind him. "As you can see," Marcus said, his voice smooth as poison, "Mr. Maxwell has a documented history of failure. A history that was, for some reason, not disclosed by Ms. Sinclair during the initial vetting process. One could almost believe she was trying to hide it." He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. "I'm not suggesting impropriety. I am merely suggesting a severe lapse in judgment, perhaps clouded by a personal desire to rectify a past decision." The other partners shifted in their seats, their faces grim. They were investors. They understood risk, but they did not tolerate sentiment. Naima had been backed into a corner. If she defended Kieran, she appeared compromised. If she abandoned him, she proved Marcus's point and sacrificed the best investment the firm had seen in years. She let the silence stretch, feeling their judgment settle upon her. The old Naima would have fought back with data, with projections, with a ruthless dissection of Marcus's own mediocre track record. But she wasn't the old Naima. She stood up slowly, her movements deliberate. She didn't look at Marcus. She looked at each of her partners, one by one, meeting their eyes. "Marcus is right," she said, her voice clear and steady. The room went dead silent. Marcus's smug expression faltered. "He's right that I did not disclose my full history with Mr. Maxwell. And he is right that my judgment regarding this investment is, in fact, personal." She took a breath, letting the admission land. "I am the one who terminated Mr. Maxwell's contract. I am the one who signed this file." She gestured to the screen. "I wrote these words. And I was wrong. Utterly and completely wrong." This was not a language they understood in this room. This was not the sound of power. It was the sound of truth. "I judged a man's entire worth on a single data point, a minor error in a complex system. I was so focused on the bottom line that I failed to see the brilliant, innovative mind right in front of me. I saw a contractor, not a founder. I saw a problem, not a person. My lapse in judgment was not in bringing him to this firm. My lapse in judgment was in letting him go in the first place." She looked past the stunned faces of her partners, her gaze fixed on the city skyline beyond the glass wall. She was speaking to them, but her words were for Kieran. "For years, I have prided myself on my ability to see value where others don't, to find the unicorn. But I have been looking in all the wrong places. I've been searching in spreadsheets and pitch decks, when the greatest assets we can invest in are integrity, resilience, and humanity. Kieran Maxwell embodies all of those things. He built a revolutionary company not in a Silicon Valley incubator, but at his kitchen table after putting his daughter to bed. He did it while grieving the loss of his wife. He did it with no resources except his own mind and his own heart." She turned her gaze back to the room. Her voice dropped, becoming intimate, raw, and devastatingly honest. "You want to talk about risk? The biggest risk we could take is letting a man like that walk out of our door a second time. I won't make that mistake again. Synchrony is the future, and Kieran Maxwell is the reason why. If you cannot see that, if you choose to be blinded by petty politics and corporate posturing, then you are not the partners I thought you were. She picked up her tablet from the table. This investment is sound. This man is brilliant. And yes, my belief in him is personal. Because he reminded me what it is we're supposed to be building here. Not just portfolios, but a better world. The choice is yours. Fund Synchrony or find a new senior partner. She didn't wait for an answer. She turned and walked out of the boardroom, her back straight, her head held high. She left behind a silence so profound it was like a physical force. She had laid down her armor, her career, her entire identity on that table. She had chosen authenticity over power, connection over control, and for the first time in her life, she felt completely, terrifyingly, gloriously free. She didn't go back to her penthouse. She drove, her hands steady on the wheel, to the one place that felt like home. She walked up the 3 flights of stairs, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She didn't know if he would be there. She didn't know what would happen next. She only knew she had to see him. She knocked softly on the door. It opened almost immediately. Kieran stood there, his face etched with worry. He hadn't changed out of his work clothes. He had clearly been waiting. "What happened?" he asked, his voice rough. She couldn't speak. The words were trapped behind a tidal wave of emotion. Instead, she just stepped forward and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in the worn fabric of his shirt. He smelled of soap and coffee and something that was just him. Something that felt like safety. His arms came around her, strong and sure, holding her tightly. He didn't ask any more questions. He just held her. They stood there for a long time in the quiet doorway of his apartment, 2 worlds colliding not with a bang, but with a quiet mutual surrender. "I chose you," she whispered into his chest. "I chose this." He pulled back just enough to look down at her, his dark eyes searching hers. He raised a hand and gently brushed a stray curl from her face, his calloused thumb impossibly gentle against her skin. "Naima," he said, his voice thick. "You didn't have to." "Yes," she said, a fierce certainty rising in her. "I did. For the first time in my life, I did something that wasn't for my parents, or my career, or my reputation. I did it for me." A small figure appeared in the hallway behind Kieran. Amara. She was holding the drawing she had given Naima, her first gift. She walked forward and held it up for them to see. "See," she said, her voice filled with the simple, unshakable logic of a child. "I knew you belonged. Now the picture is real." Naima knelt down, her eyes level with Amara's. "Yes, it is," she said, her voice breaking. "It's real." Kieran knelt beside her, his hand finding hers, his fingers intertwining with her own. The 3 of them were a small circle of warmth in the hallway, the crayon drawing a promise that had finally been fulfilled. The noise of the world outside, the boardrooms, the stock markets, the petty ambitions of men like Marcus, faded away to nothing. All that was left was the quiet, profound reality of this. A man, a woman, and a child. A family, not of blood, but of choice. A month later, a small celebration was held. Not in a fancy restaurant, but in the community garden at the end of Kieran's block. The board, swayed by Naima's conviction and the undeniable brilliance of Synchrony, had not only approved the investment, but had ousted Marcus in the process. Naima had kept her job, but she had fundamentally changed how she did it. She had started a new division at Apex, one focused on investing in founders from underrepresented backgrounds, people like Kieran. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the rows of tomato plants and blooming flowers. Amara ran through the garden, her laughter like wind chimes, her beaded braids bouncing. Naima and Kieran sat on a worn wooden bench, a comfortable silence between them. He had his arm around her, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. It felt natural. It felt right. He handed her a small, lopsided object made of brightly colored pipe cleaners. It was a butterfly. Amara made it for you, he said. She said it's a staying butterfly. It means you're not going to fly away. Naima held the small, handmade gift in her palm. It was more precious to her than any stock certificate or diamond bracelet. I'm not going anywhere, she promised, her voice soft. Kieran turned to her, his expression serious. Naima, I don't have much. This world, this is all I have to offer. She looked at him, at his kind, steady eyes. She looked at his daughter, her brown skin radiant in the golden light as she chased a real butterfly through the flowers. She looked at the vibrant, loving life he had built from loss and hope. Kieran, she said, her voice full of a love so deep it astonished her. This is not much. This is everything. He didn't need a grand proposal or a diamond ring. Their commitment was forged in burnt garlic bread and crayon drawings, in shared silence and quiet acts of care. It was built on the foundation of being truly seen. Amara ran back to them, her face bright with excitement. She held up a small, freshly picked daisy. She looked from her father's face to Naima's, her head tilted. So, she asked, with all the gravity a 6-year-old could muster, does this mean you're staying forever? Naima looked at Kieran, whose eyes were shining with unshed tears. She smiled, a real, brilliant smile that reached her eyes and lit up her entire face. She reached out and took the daisy from Amara's small hand. Yes, she said, her voice clear and sure, a promise made not just to the child, but to herself. Forever. The story of their life together was not one of headlines or stock prices. It was written in the small, sacred moments. It was found in the smell of dinner cooking, the sound of bedtime stories, the quiet comfort of a hand to hold in the dark. Naima learned that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in the richness of human connection. Kieran learned that it was safe to let love back into the home he had so carefully guarded. And Amara, their bright, beautiful Amara, grew up in a house filled with laughter, surrounded by the fierce and tender love of a family that had not been found by accident, but had been bravely and deliberately chosen. For love, they discovered, is not something you earn by being perfect. It is something you build, one small, courageous act of kindness at a time.